The city of Riverton was a bustling metropolis known for its vibrant black neighborhoods and the strong sense of community that defined them. As the sun began to set over the sprawling expanse of downtown, the tension in the air was palpable as people arrived home from work or school, tired but energized by their daily routines. The streets were filled with activity, honking horns, and street vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. But for David Coleman, his day had just started like any other, except that it would soon become a nightmare. As Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, two white police officers assigned to handle neighborhood disputes, pulled up outside the courthouse in Riverton's downtown area, their faces etched with anger and frustration as they watched Aisha Coleman, a 32-year-old black woman, being dragged behind their cruiser by her husband David. Aisha was sitting nervously at the front of the proceedings, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain how they had got into an argument. "It started when I was walking home from work late that evening after picking up a package from my mother," Aisha explained, trying to remain calm despite her fear and anxiety. "I wasn't expecting any noise coming from David's car, but it did." She looked at the two officers with a mixture of frustration and confusion as they stood by their cruiser, waiting for her to explain. Mark Reynolds' face was masked with anger and aggression as he glared at Aisha, his voice rising in intensity. "You're not welcome here," he snarled, brandishing his police badge like it were a weapon. "I won't let you come over now." David, who had been standing by her side, couldn't help but feel the heat of Mark Reynolds' anger building inside him. He was used to working with Aisha on cases, treating her as though she were just another member of their community. But now, everything seemed different, and it wasn't just the way Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter treated her. Over the next few days, David began piecing together a picture of his wife's life before she had been attacked by Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter. He found that Aisha was a talented musician who performed at local venues in the city's black neighborhoods. She also had a successful career as an artist, selling paintings to galleries across the country. But what caught David's attention were the details of her family. Her mother lived on a small farm in one of Riverton's black communities, and Aisha's father was a retired military intelligence officer who served with the U.S. Navy SEALs during the Vietnam War. Despite his service, he had struggled to make ends meet, leaving Aisha and their 4 children to fend for themselves. David realized that Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter not only targeted Aisha because of her race, but also hoped to silence her and cut off any support she might have had from her family in order to protect the corrupt officers they worked with. They knew that if Aisha were able to speak out about their actions, it could lead to a loss of funding for their department and potential legal repercussions. David decided to take matters into his own hands. He began gathering evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using hidden cameras and audio recordings to document the events leading up to Aisha's attack. As he did so, David discovered that not only was she targeted because of her race, but also David knew that if he were able to expose their crimes to the public, it would send a message about racism in the police department and put an end to the systemic issues that had led to Aisha's attack. He also wanted to bring attention to the broader issue of racial violence against black people in the city, which was rife with incidents of brutality, discrimination, and injustice. David began reaching out to local community leaders, activists, and journalists to gather information about Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter's activities as police officers and their impact on the black neighborhoods. He shared Aisha's story and highlighting the dangers faced by people like her who were fighting for justice. But he knew that the fight against racism was not just an individual battle. It required a collective effort from everyone in Riverton to challenge systemic issues and build a more inclusive community. As David continued his investigation, he found himself drawn deeper into the web of corruption within the police department. He uncovered evidence of ties between corrupt officers and powerful political figures, including some who were responsible for planning racial violence and land grabs in black neighborhoods. These individuals had been protected by Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using their influence to silence Aisha's voice and protect themselves from scrutiny. David knew that he couldn't stop the police department from protecting its own. Instead, he needed to take matters into his own hands and expose the truth about what was happening in Riverton. He began organizing protests and rallies, calling for greater transparency and accountability within the department. Despite these challenges, David refused to back down. He knew that the only way to bring about change was through persistence and determination. He spent months gathering evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using hidden cameras and audio recordings to document their actions leading up to Aisha's attack. As he did so, David discovered that not only was she targeted because of her race, but also David knew that if he were able to expose their crimes to the public, it would send a message about racism in the police department and put an end to the systemic issues that had led to Aisha's attack. He also wanted to bring attention to the broader issue of racial violence against black people in the city, which was rife with incidents of brutality, discrimination, and injustice. David began reaching out to local community leaders, activists, and journalists to gather information about Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter's activities as police officers and their impact on the black neighborhoods. He shared Aisha's story and highlighting the dangers faced by people like her who were fighting for justice. But he knew that the fight against racism was not just an individual battle. It required a collective effort from everyone in Riverton to challenge systemic issues and build a more inclusive community. As David continued his investigation, he found himself drawn deeper into the web of corruption within the police department. He uncovered evidence of ties between corrupt officers and powerful political figures, including some who were responsible for planning racial violence and land grabs in black neighborhoods. These individuals had been protected by Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using their influence to silence Aisha's voice and protect themselves from scrutiny. David knew that he couldn't stop the police department from protecting its own. Instead, he needed to take matters into his own hands and expose the truth about what was happening in Riverton. He began organizing protests and rallies, calling for greater transparency and accountability within the department. Despite these challenges, David refused to back down. He knew that the only way to bring about change was through persistence and determination. He spent months gathering evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using hidden cameras and audio recordings to document their actions leading up to Aisha's attack. As he did so, David discovered that not only was she targeted because of her race, but also David knew that if he were able to expose their crimes to the public, it would send a message about racism in the police department and put an end to the systemic issues that had led to Aisha's attack. He also wanted to bring attention to the broader issue of racial violence against black people in the city, which was rife with incidents of brutality, discrimination, and injustice. David began reaching out to local community leaders, activists, and journalists to gather information about Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter's activities as police officers and their impact on the black neighborhoods. He shared Aisha's story and highlighting the dangers faced by people like her who were fighting for justice. But he knew that the fight against racism was not just an individual battle. It required a collective effort from everyone in Riverton to challenge systemic issues and build a more inclusive community. As David continued his investigation, he found himself drawn deeper into the web of corruption within the police department. He uncovered evidence of ties between corrupt officers and powerful political figures, including some who were responsible for planning racial violence and land grabs in black neighborhoods. These individuals had been protected by Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using their influence to silence Aisha's voice and protect themselves from scrutiny. David knew that he couldn't stop the police department from protecting its own. Instead, he needed to take matters into his own hands and expose the truth about what was happening in Riverton. He began organizing protests and rallies, calling for greater transparency and accountability within the department. Despite these challenges, David refused to back down. He knew that the only way to bring about change was through persistence and determination. He spent months gathering evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, using hidden cameras and audio recordings to document their actions leading up to Aisha's attack. As he did so, David discovered that not only was she targeted because of her race, but also David knew that if he were able to expose their crimes to the public, it would send a message about racism in the police department and put an end to the systemic issues that had led to Aisha. The sun began to set over Riverton, the once bustling town now shrouded in a thick fog. The air was thick with tension, as everyone seemed tense and uneasy. David had been living here for years, but he knew that something wasn't right in this community. For months now, his neighborhoods were under attack. They'd seen it all: the racist attacks on innocent people, the harassment of womenfolk, the constant surveillance and monitoring by Mark Reynolds' cronies. He was determined to bring these events to light, but he knew that getting justice would be a long journey. David had heard rumors about his own neighbor, Aisha, being targeted due to her race, and felt it was time for him to take matters into his own hands. With the help of his friends Steve Carter and Jonathan Wright, David began organizing protests and rallies in Riverton, calling on people from all walks of life to join their cause. They held flash mobs outside Mark Reynolds' office, disrupting traffic and drawing attention to the issue. Despite these challenges, David refused to back down. He knew that he had a responsibility to fight for what was right, not just his own interests. As he worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter, David delved deeper into their activities leading up to Aisha's attack. They'd been using hidden cameras and audio recordings to document their actions, showing how they targeted people based on their race. The footage captured a tense scene where Mark Reynolds was seen talking down to a group of young men in the street, telling them that if they didn't comply with his orders or speak out against him, they would be punished. The men looked terrified and nodded as he spoke, but there were signs of aggression in their eyes. At the same time, Steve Carter had been monitoring Aisha's movements closely, following her every step from school to home. She was seen engaging in confrontations with strangers who approached her, often using racial slurs and aggressive behavior. The footage showed how she seemed to be losing control at these moments, but David could see that something didn't feel right. As the recordings continued, it became clear that Aisha's attack wasn't just targeted because of her race. There was a systemic issue within the Riverton Police Department that needed addressing. The officers had been using excessive force and brutality against people based on their color, including black men like David. They were accused of racist profiling and discriminatory practices, which led to innocent people being subjected to unnecessary violence. David knew he couldn't stop at just exposing Mark Reynolds' crimes. There was a larger issue at stake. He started researching the history of racism in the police department, looking for evidence that showed how it had been perpetuated over time. He discovered that Aisha's attack wasn't an isolated incident, but rather part of a wider pattern. The footage from hidden cameras and audio recordings revealed that Mark Reynolds' cronies had worked with local authorities to cover up their tracks, intimidating witnesses and spreading rumors about the attacks on black people. They'd been using intimidation tactics to silence anyone who dared to speak out against them or report their encounters with Aisha's attackers. David knew he needed to take action now before things got worse. He reached out to the Department of Justice in Riverton for help, providing evidence and testimony that showed how Mark Reynolds' Crim. ES were not only targeting innocent people, but also contributing to a systemic issue within the police department. The agency took note of David's efforts and began investigating his claims. As they delved deeper into Aisha's case, they discovered that other black individuals in Riverton had been targeted based on their race as well. It was clear that racism wasn't just limited to Mark Reynolds' cronies, but a systemic issue within the police department itself. The officers were accused of racial profiling and discrimination, which led to innocent people being subjected to unnecessary violence. The evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter mounted, and they faced multiple charges for their involvement in Aisha's attack, as well as other racist crimes committed by them. David stood at the forefront of the movement, calling out to the community and demanding accountability from those responsible. As the trial began, David was grilled by a skeptical jury about his evidence against Mark Reynolds and Steve Carter. He faced intense cross-examination, but he remained calm and focused on providing solid proof that their actions were not justified. The prosecution tried to discredit him by calling witnesses who had previously claimed they saw racial profiling and discrimination within the police department, but David's testimony proved them wrong. In a stunning revelation, it was revealed that Mark Reynolds had been using his position as a detective in charge of Aisha's case for years to cover up his own racist activities. He had manipulated evidence, planted false statements about her attacker, and intimidated witnesses who tried to report their encounters with him. The trial ended with the court sentences of 7 years in prison and lifetime parole. The news was a huge blow to Mark Reynolds' reputation as a police officer and shattered the illusion that he could operate without any consequences for his actions. It also exposed the systemic issues within the Riverton Police Department, leading to calls for reform from community members, government officials, and even some law enforcement agencies. As David returned home after serving 7 years in prison, he knew that it was only just the beginning of a long journey towards justice. The fight against racism and discrimination would never be over, but with his experience as an advocate for change, he had become a symbol of hope for those who were fighting back against these forces. He continued to speak out about Aisha's attack and other instances of racial profiling within the police department, using his platform to raise awareness and inspire others to take action. He organized rallies, met with community leaders, and even started working on legislative reforms that would help address the issue of racism in policing. Despite the obstacles he faced along the way, David remained dedicated to bringing about change and ensuring justice for all people, no matter their race or background. His unwavering commitment had made him a true leader who was willing to fight against injustice and stand up for what is right. As the sun began to set over Riverton, the tension in the air was palpable. The small town of 500 residents had been caught off guard when a group of white men armed with guns approached their homes and demanded that they hand over Aisha's family members. David had seen the incident unfold from his police station window just hours before, but he knew it was too late to stop what was happening. The community members who witnessed the attack were filled with anger and frustration, many calling for reform within the local government and law enforcement agencies themselves. David saw this as an opportunity to bring about change and make a difference in the lives of those affected by racism. As the night wore on, David continued his activism efforts, organizing rallies and speaking out against racial profiling at public events throughout Riverton. He met with community leaders who shared their stories of discrimination and prejudice, discussing how it had impacted them personally and professionally. They urged him to use his platform as a former police officer and advocate for change to raise awareness about the issue. In response to David's efforts, the local government took notice and began investigating Aisha family members against multiple counts of assault and theft. The case was initially dismissed due to lack of evidence, but David refused to accept this disease. He knew that he had a responsibility to bring the truth out and hold those responsible accountable. David hired a private investigator who worked tirelessly for several months to gather evidence and interview witnesses in order to build a strong case against Aisha's attackers. The investigation revealed that they were part of a larger group of white men who had been targeting African American residents, specifically young people with criminal records and disabilities. They had made their way into the town by blending in with the community and gaining access to the homes of Aisha's family members. David knew that he would have to confront these individuals directly if he wanted to bring them to justice, but also feared for his own safety as a result of their violent tactics. He spent countless nights strategizing and preparing himself for each meeting, practicing self-defense techniques, and using pepper spray when necessary. One day, David's courage was finally met with the opportunity to face his attackers in person. The town council had decided that they would hold a hearing on the case to hear both sides of the argument and make a decision about whether or not Aisha's family members were guilty of their crimes. David was nervous but determined to stand up for what he believed in, knowing that this could have far-reaching consequences. On the day of the hearing, David arrived at the council meeting room early in the morning, dressed professionally as always. The tension in the air was palpable as community members crowded around him, some whispering and others raising their voices. David stood tall before the panel, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he began to speak, David opened by acknowledging that Aisha's family had been targeted because of their race and background, but went on to explain how they were not just victims, but also members of a community fighting against injustice. He spoke about the systemic racism within the police department, where African American residents are often subjected to discriminatory practices such as racial profiling, excessive use of force, and lack of support for those with mental health issues. David challenged the panel to consider how they could address these issues if they wanted to create a fair and just justice system. He spoke about the need for reform within law enforcement agencies and the importance of investing in training programs that teach officers cultural awareness and empathy towards marginalized communities. As David continued his speech, he noticed several members from both sides nodding along with him. Some were skeptical or even hostile, but others listened intently as he shared his thoughts on how they could work together to create a more equitable society. After hours of testimony, the council ultimately made their decision to dismiss Aisha's family members against multiple counts of assault and theft due to insufficient evidence. David was disappointed but also relieved that justice had been served in this case. He knew that there were still many challenges ahead for those affected by racism in Riverton, including efforts towards criminal justice reform and addressing systemic inequalities within the community. However, David remained committed to his mission to bring about change and ensure that Aisha's story would not be forgotten. He continued to speak out at rallies and meetings throughout Riverton, using his platform as a former police officer and advocate for civil rights to raise awareness about the issue of racism in policing and its impact on communities. As he sat back in his comfortable office, David reflected on what had happened that day. It was a turning point in his journey towards justice, but it also marked a beginning. He knew that there would be many more challenges ahead, but with his unwavering commitment to the cause of racial equality and his dedication to bringing about change, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The sun had set over Riverton, but its light continued to shine on David's journey towards justice as a symbol of hope for those who were fighting against racism and discrimination. The global outline. Asterisk as the sun began to set over Riverton, the air was thick with a palpable tension. The city buzzed with anticipation and fear as people gathered for a vigil in support of Aisha's case. Asterisk in this small town nestled along the Mississippi River, racism had been simmering beneath the surface for years, affecting not just its residents, but also those who served and protected them on the force. Asterisk David, a former police officer with a passion for justice and racial equality, had always felt an unquenchable drive to address this issue in his home community. He knew firsthand how systemic racism played a role in criminalizing black individuals and perpetuating poverty, which he believed was unacceptable in any society. Asterisk Aisha, the young black woman who had been wrongfully accused of murder in Riverton, had become an emblematic figure for these issues, her drawing national attention to the pervasive nature of racial bias in policing. As David stood vigil with other activists and community leaders, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy and frustration at what they were witnessing. Asterisk the town's residents came together to mourn Aisha's loss, while also amplifying their demand for justice. They organized rallies, marches, and protests that drew thousands of people, all united in their fight against the systemic racism ingrained in the system of law enforcement. Asterisk despite the overwhelming support they received, David remained determined to bring about change. He continued his efforts by speaking out at local community meetings, sharing personal experiences with Aisha's case, and engaging with policymakers to advocate for reforms that would address the root causes of racial injustice in policing. Asterisk as he sat back in his comfortable office, David reflected on what had happened that day. It was a turning point in his journey towards justice, but it also marked a beginning. He knew that there were many more challenges ahead, but with his unwavering commitment to the cause of racial equality and his dedication to bringing about change, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Asterisk the sun had set over Riverton, but its light continued to shine on David's journey towards justice as a symbol of hope for those who were fighting against racism and discrimination. He knew that it wouldn't be easy, but with the strength of his convictions and the support of his community, he was determined to make a difference. Asterisk the following day, David met with local officials from the city's police department, including the chief of police and the district attorney. As they discussed Aisha's case and potential reforms, David shared his vision for a more equitable justice system that prioritized transparency, accountability, and respect for all individuals regardless of their race. Asterisk the discussion was heated, with some officials expressing skepticism about reform efforts and dismissing the concerns of black communities as mere distractions or self-interest. However, David remained steadfast in his belief that change was necessary to address this pervasive issue. Asterisk despite resistance from those within the department, David pressed on, outlining specific measures he would propose to improve police training, reduce racial profiling, and increase community engagement with law enforcement. He also emphasized the need for greater transparency in investigations and accountability for officers who violate ethical standards or engage in discriminatory practices. Asterisk the meeting left both sides feeling divided, but David refused to back down. He continued his advocacy efforts, organizing workshops and forums where local residents could share their experiences with racial discrimination and explore potential solutions together. Asterisk as the days passed, David's message began to gain traction. Local activists, community leaders, and concerned citizens from all walks of life came together to support David's cause, amplifying his calls for change and raising awareness about the need for a more just society. The city council held a public hearing on the proposed reforms, where residents expressed their support and provided input into the process. David addressed these concerns directly, highlighting the importance of addressing racial bias in policing from both ends of the spectrum, ensuring that officers are trained to identify and address discriminatory behaviors while also acknowledging the systemic issues within the department. The council's decision was a mixed bag, with some members advocating for increased funding for police departments and reforms aimed at reducing crime rates. David recognized this as an opportunity to advocate for change in his home community, but acknowledged that more work would be needed to address the larger issue of racial injustice. In policing. As the final act of his campaign unfolded, David stood before a packed auditorium with hundreds of residents gathered from all corners of Riverton. He gave a passionate speech, sharing personal stories and anecdotes about Aisha's case, as well as the broader impact that systemic racism had on their community. In the end, he addressed the council members directly, emphasizing his commitment to bringing about meaningful change in the face of adversity. As they debated and discussed potential reforms, David reminded them of the power they held within the city to effect positive change and create a more just society for all residents. The council ultimately approved the proposed changes, with some modifications and adjustments made to address concerns raised during the public hearing. As Aisha's case was finally dismissed in court, her story had not only brought attention to the systemic issues of racism within policing, but also served as a catalyst for broader conversations about racial justice and equality. The sun continued to set over Riverton that night, casting long shadows across David's office window. Inside his cozy workspace, he took a deep breath, feeling both relieved and energized by the progress that had been made in his fight against racism. For as he looked out on the streets below him, he knew that there was still much work to be done, but with the support of his community and the unwavering commitment of those who believed in justice for all, he was ready to tackle this complex issue head-on once again. As the sun rose over Riverton on another beautiful morning, David stood at the center of a sea of supporters gathered around him. He smiled as he looked out on his hometown, grateful for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself and dedicated to making a lasting impact in creating a more equitable society where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background. And so, Riverton became a shining beacon of hope for those who were fighting against racism and discrimination. Its residents had come together to mourn Aisha's loss while also amplifying their demand for justice, inspiring others across the country to join them in the pursuit of change. For David, it was not just about bringing down one case or one individual, but rather about creating a society that values diversity, promotes equality, and fosters an atmosphere where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. As he continued on his journey towards justice, David knew that there would be many more challenges ahead. But with the unwavering commitment of those who believed in his vision for change and the support of a community that shared their passion for racial equality, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead as the sun rose over Riverton once again, shining brightly on the path towards creating a better future for all residents. Global outline. As the sun began to set over Riverton, the tension in the air was palpable. The city's streets were bustling with people of all walks of life as they gathered outside Aisha's memorial at the corner of Main and Oak Avenues. The once thriving neighborhood had been ravaged by a senseless act of violence that left countless lives lost and families shattered. In the aftermath, There was an outpouring of grief and outrage over what had occurred in Riverton, with residents united in their determination to seek justice for Aisha and those who were affected. David, a successful lawyer known for his unwavering commitment to racial equality, found himself drawn into this cause. He knew that he could play a vital role in bringing accountability to the responsible parties and helping to heal the wounds of the past. As he delved deeper into Aisha's case, David encountered countless obstacles along the way, from entrenched power structures and resistance from those who opposed his efforts to dismantle systemic racism. Despite these challenges, David refused to give up on his mission. He knew that true justice would not be achieved without a willingness to listen to marginalized communities' voices and work towards solutions that address their unique needs and experiences. As he met with community leaders, activists, and members of Aisha's family, David discovered a deep understanding of the root causes of discrimination in Riverton and the broader American society. Through conversations about race relations, economic disparities, and access to education and healthcare, David began to see patterns that echoed across many communities. He realized that racism was not just an individual or community issue, but rather a systemic problem that had been deeply ingrained within our justice system for generations. As he continued his investigation, David uncovered evidence of racial profiling, discrimination in hiring practices, and unequal access to resources and opportunities. These findings led him to identify key stakeholders who were responsible for perpetuating these injustices and working towards meaningful change. With the support of a diverse group of activists, community organizers, and allies, David organized rallies, marches, and protests across the city, demanding accountability from those in positions of power and pushing for policy reforms that would address the root causes of discrimination. He also worked tirelessly to educate the public about the importance of racial justice and how they could play a role in promoting it. As word spread about David's efforts, his reputation as a champion for racial equality grew exponentially. People from all walks of life came together to support him and his cause, inspired by Aisha's memory and the bravery of those who fought against injustice. In this next chapter, we see David taking on new challenges as he continues his quest towards justice in Riverton. He faces not only more resistance, but also new obstacles that threaten to derail his efforts. One such challenge comes from a powerful business owner named Mr. Taliakuri, who has deep ties to the community and is fiercely opposed to any form of reform or change. Despite David's attempts to engage with him on an individual level, he refused to see beyond personal interests and was more concerned about preserving his legacy than promoting justice. This setback raises a deeper question. Can change come at the expense of those who have been historically marginalized? For Mr. Taliakuri, this conflict is not just about his own business, but also about the broader systemic issues that lie at its heart, the perpetuation of racial inequality and discrimination in all aspects of life. As David grapples with these challenges, he faces a critical turning point. He must decide whether to continue pushing for reform or accept defeat as an unwilling participant in what could be seen as a futile battle against powerful interests that have long denied him the right to exist. In this moment, David turns his attention towards understanding and empathizing with Mr. Taliakuri's perspective. He recognizes the importance of navigating complex political landscapes and finding ways to balance individual rights with collective needs. With careful consideration, he decides to engage in a constructive dialogue aimed at addressing Mr. Taliakuri's concerns while also advocating for systemic change. In this process, David works closely with community leaders, activists, and other stakeholders who share his vision of racial justice. Together, they develop strategies that address the root causes of discrimination, such as fair hiring practices, inclusive policies, and access to education and healthcare, while respecting Mr. Talia Curry's interests in preserving his legacy. Asterisk as the dialogue unfolds, David learns about the challenges faced by marginalized communities at all levels, from low-income neighborhoods to suburban areas with limited resources. He realizes that change is not a linear process but requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to listen to diverse perspectives before making meaningful progress. Asterisk along this journey, David also encounters resistance from some individuals who hold deep-rooted beliefs about the role of government in addressing societal issues. They argue that reform efforts would undermine individual freedoms and values and could lead to a loss of control over people's lives. Asterisk, however, David maintains his commitment to promoting racial justice by emphasizing its potential benefits for everyone, not just marginalized communities, but also individuals who have been historically excluded from participating fully in society due to systemic barriers. He argues that addressing racism is crucial for building more inclusive and equitable societies where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. Asterisk in the face of opposition, David engages in a series of public speaking engagements, sharing his message of racial justice through powerful anecdotes and personal stories. By connecting these experiences directly to everyday life, he aims to engage not only those who support him, but also those who may be resistant or skeptical about change. Asterisk as his advocacy gains traction, David's reputation as a trailblazer in the fight for racial equality begins to soar. His speeches are invited by local organizations and media outlets, and he becomes an influential figure in shaping public discourse on this important issue. Asterisk in addition to speaking engagements, David also launches a social media campaign, using his platform to share resources, raise awareness about racial justice issues, and engage with the broader community. He encourages individuals to take action by volunteering at local organizations that work towards creating more equitable communities, attending rallies, and supporting policy reforms. In this final chapter of the story, we see David continuing his journey towards justice in Riverton as he faces new challenges and obstacles. As he pushes for systemic change, he remains committed not only to Aisha's memory, but also to ensuring that her legacy lives on through a more equitable society. Asterisk with the support of allies and community leaders, David continues to work tirelessly to dismantle racial injustice at every level, from policy reforms to education initiatives, healthcare access, and fair hiring practices. He remains vigilant in protecting marginalized communities' voices and pushing for meaningful change while recognizing that progress is not an easy journey, but requires a collective effort. Asterisk as the sun rises over Riverton once again on this new day of healing and growth, David knows that he has taken a giant step towards creating a better future for all residents. With the ongoing efforts of those who believe in his vision and the support of communities across the nation, he believes that Aisha's legacy can be carried forward and shaped into something more meaningful than ever before. Asterisk as the story comes to a close, David reflects on the journey so far and looks ahead with renewed purpose. He knows that there is still much work to be done in addressing systemic racism and promoting racial justice, but he remains committed to continuing this important fight until all individuals are treated equally and respected regardless of their race or background. Asterisk in this final chapter, we see David's unwavering commitment to change as the sun rises over Riverton once again. The tension in the air is palpable, but with each passing day, a sense of hope and possibility washes over him. inspiring those around him to work towards creating a better future for all residents. As the sun began to set over Riverton, the tension in the air was palpable. David stood outside the hospital's main entrance, his heart racing with anticipation and worry. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls as patients were led into their respective rooms for treatment or recovery. He had been tasked with overseeing Aisha's Legacy Project, a community-led initiative aimed at addressing systemic racism in healthcare facilities across America. David knew that he was part of a larger team working towards a common goal: to create a more equitable and just society where everyone is treated equally regardless of their race or background. As the days passed, David met with representatives from various organizations and communities, listening intently as they discussed the challenges faced in healthcare facilities across America's racial divides. One particular conversation stood out that sparked David's attention. A patient named Ananya Petrov had been denied access to specialized care due to her skin color during a routine checkup at a local hospital. Despite being of white race herself, Ananya Petrov was treated unfairly by the facility's staff and ultimately dismissed from treatment plans for fear of discrimination. David knew firsthand how difficult it can be for individuals like Ananya Petrov to navigate the healthcare system when their racial identity is not aligned with their medical needs or background. He immediately rallied his team to take action, organizing a meeting with hospital administrators and community leaders to discuss ways to address this issue. The meeting was tense from the outset, as each party brought their unique perspective and concerns to the table. David emphasized that healthcare facilities have a responsibility to treat all patients equally, regardless of their race or background. He outlined his vision for creating an inclusive system where individuals are evaluated based on their medical needs rather than their race. To achieve this goal, David proposed several initiatives that would be implemented in collaboration with community organizations and hospitals across the nation. These included establishing specialized care centers within hospitals to provide culturally competent healthcare services, training hospital staff on how to recognize and address unconscious biases, promoting diversity and inclusion programs for patients and families, and partnering with community-based organizations to advocate for policy changes at the local level. The team faced resistance from some quarters, particularly those who argued that these initiatives would increase costs or reduce access to care. David acknowledged their concerns, but emphasized that investing in diverse healthcare services was not only a matter of equity, but also a way to improve patient outcomes and satisfaction. To address this challenge, David led the team through a series of workshops and training sessions aimed at educating hospital staff on the importance of cultural competency, unconscious bias, and inclusive policies. He encouraged them to actively seek out information about different cultures and communities within their respective hospitals and organizations, learn from best practices, and implement culturally sensitive approaches in all aspects of healthcare delivery. Furthermore, David proposed a program called Race Matters that would help patients and families navigate the healthcare system more effectively by providing access to information on racial disparities in healthcare services. This program would involve creating informational brochures and resources for hospitals, community organizations, and patients, as well as offering training sessions for staff members on recognizing and addressing biases. As the team continued their work towards implementing these initiatives, they faced numerous obstacles along the way. Some hospital administrators were resistant to change due to concerns about increased costs or reduced patient satisfaction, while others struggled with how best to incorporate diverse cultural practices into established systems. Despite this adversity, David remained committed to his vision and worked tirelessly to overcome every challenge that came their way. He reached out to community leaders, healthcare professionals, and policymakers across the nation, advocating for policy changes at all levels of government to address systemic racism in healthcare facilities. Over time, the team's efforts began to bear fruit. The implementation of Race Matters program led to an increase in patient satisfaction ratings, as patients felt more comfortable seeking care from a culturally sensitive environment. Hospital administrators were also receptive to their recommendations and implemented changes that aimed at reducing racial disparities within their institutions. David's unwavering commitment paid off when the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, issued new guidelines for healthcare providers on how to address unconscious biases in patient evaluations. These guidelines emphasize the importance of cultural competency, diversity training, and inclusive policies, providing a framework for hospitals and organizations across the nation to implement these best practices. The team's efforts also received national recognition, with numerous awards recognizing their work towards creating an equitable healthcare system that treats all patients equally regardless of their race or background. David was hailed as a leader in addressing systemic racism in healthcare facilities, and his vision became a global trendsetter for other communities seeking to create more inclusive systems. In the final chapters of the story, we see David's unwavering commitment to change continue as the sun rises over Riverton once again. The tension in the air is palpable, but with each passing day, a sense of hope and possibility washes over him, inspiring those around him to work towards creating a better future for all residents. The hospital where Aisha had passed away was now an integral part of David's legacy project. He stood outside its main entrance, watching as patients arrived for their appointments or treatments, each one greeted with warmth and respect due to the diversity of backgrounds represented within its walls. As he watched from a distance, David couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his work. He had been able to create something meaningful that would continue to shape healthcare facilities across America's racial divides for generations to come. And while there was still much work to be done, he knew that with the support and encouragement of those around him, he could make it happen. As David stood outside the hospital's main entrance, his heart racing with anticipation and worry, he looked forward to a future where healthcare facilities were not only providers of medical care, but also champions for social justice and equality. For in this new day of healing and growth, David knew that Aisha's legacy could be carried forward and shaped into something more meaningful than ever before. The sun continued to set over Riverton, casting a warm glow across the bustling city. As Aisha stood outside her beloved clinic's main entrance, she couldn't shake off the weight of grief that weighed down upon her chest. The silence was deafening as patients arrived for their appointments or treatments, each one greeted with a mix of shock and admiration. She had known it would be difficult to accept Aisha passing, but now that it was finally happening, she found herself struggling to process the news. David stood beside her, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had been working tirelessly on behalf of the clinic for years, creating spaces where patients from all walks of life could receive compassionate care and support in a safe and welcoming environment. Aisha's dedication and compassion had not gone unnoticed by everyone she worked alongside, and David knew that it was her legacy that would carry forward this mission. As they stood outside the hospital's main entrance, David took one last look at Aisha before turning to face him. He could see the sadness etched on her face, but also a glimmer of determination in her eyes. "Aisha," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he held out his hand for her. "We have so much work ahead of us." Aisha took David's hand and let it rest upon hers, tears streaming down her cheeks. "David," she whispered, looking up at him with love in her eyes. "I'm proud of everything you've done here. You've created a space where people can come to heal from their struggles and find hope." David felt a surge of gratitude wash over him as he looked into Aisha's face. He knew that it was impossible for him to repay the incredible sacrifices she had made for those in need, but he also recognized the importance of her legacy being passed on. "Your work is not just about creating spaces," David continued, his voice deepening with conviction. "It's about inspiring others to see beyond their own barriers and reach out for help when they need it. You've shown that even in a city like Riverton, where systemic inequalities exist, there is still hope." Aisha nodded softly as she looked up at him, tears streaming down her face once again. She knew what David was saying, the power of compassion and empathy to overcome adversity, to break down barriers and create change for the better. "I'm proud that you've continued Aisha's work," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "And I know that with your support and guidance, we can make it happen." David smiled at her as he took another deep breath before turning back towards the entrance of the clinic. He could see the anticipation in everyone's faces, knowing that they were about to embark on an exciting new journey together. As David made his way inside the clinic, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and optimism wash over him. He knew that Aisha's legacy would live on for generations to come, and with her spirit guiding them every step of the way, they could create a world where healthcare was accessible and inclusive to all individuals, regardless of their background or circumstances. In this new day of healing and growth, David looked forward to working alongside his colleagues and patients as they continued Aisha's legacy. He knew that it wouldn't be an easy task, but he also recognized the importance of perseverance and determination in achieving a brighter future for healthcare facilities across America's racial divides. With a deep breath and a renewed sense of purpose, David turned towards the clinic's entrance, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as he did so, he knew that Aisha's legacy would live on forevermore, inspiring others to see beyond their own barriers and reach for help when they need it most. In the heart of Riverton, a bustling city nestled along the banks of the Mississippi River, the sun began to set and cast its warm glow over the clinic that served as Aisha's legacy. David stood at the entrance, his face illuminated by the gentle hues of pink and orange, ready to embark on an exciting new journey together. As he made his way inside the clinic, a sense of hope washed over him. He knew that Aisha's legacy would live on for generations to come, and with her spirit guiding them every step of the way, they could create a world where healthcare was accessible and inclusive to all individuals, regardless of their background or circumstances. The clinic was filled with the sounds of patients seeking treatment, doctors working tirelessly to heal, and volunteers lending a hand in providing support. David had always been drawn to Aisha's dedication to improving access to health care for underserved communities, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. As he walked through the waiting room, his heart heavy with emotion as he saw the faces of individuals who were struggling to find affordable medical care or meet their basic needs. He could see that even in this bustling city, there was a profound need for change and progress. David knew that it wouldn't be an easy task, but he also recognized the importance of perseverance and determination in achieving a brighter future for healthcare facilities across America's racial divides. As he made his way towards Aisha's office on the third floor, David could feel the energy in the room building as she sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and notes. "David," Aisha called out with a soft voice, her eyes scanning over him before turning to face him. "I've been waiting for you." "I'm here," David replied, feeling both nervous and excited. He had always admired Aisha's resilience and tenacity in the face of challenges, but now he knew that it was time to take action. Aisha stood up from her desk, a determined expression on her face. "David, I've been working tirelessly to expand our clinic's reach into underserved communities, particularly those who are most vulnerable due to systemic racism and disparities in healthcare access." David nodded, understanding the gravity of Aisha's mission. He knew that he had come along for the ride, joining forces with her team to create a world where all individuals have equal access to high-quality medical care. Aisha handed him a folder filled with documents outlining their expansion plans, including targeted outreach programs in underserved areas, partnerships with community organizations, and financial assistance options for patients who couldn't afford health care. David felt overwhelmed by the scope of Aisha's vision, but he also knew that it was essential to work together to make her dreams a reality. They spent hours discussing the details of their plans, brainstorming solutions to overcome obstacles along the way. From navigating complex zoning laws and land acquisition processes to securing funding from local government agencies, David felt like an experienced negotiator as they worked through seemingly insurmountable challenges. Despite the difficulties, Aisha's determination was unwavering. "David," she said finally, her voice laced with conviction, "we cannot rest until our clinic reaches every single community in America. We must make a difference and provide access to health care for all." David nodded once more, feeling inspired by Aisha's resilience and commitment to the cause. Together, they set out on this new journey, determined to transform the lives of countless individuals through their work at the Riverton Clinic. As they worked tirelessly behind closed doors, David couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his role as part of such an important mission. He knew that Aisha's legacy was not just about providing medical care, but also creating a more equitable and inclusive society where everyone had access to basic necessities like food, housing, and healthcare. As the sun began to set over Riverton, David felt grateful for this opportunity to contribute to Aisha's vision of a world transformed by her spirit. He knew that it would be an ongoing journey, but he was confident in their team's determination to make a lasting impact on the lives of countless individuals across America. With a deep breath and a renewed sense of purpose, David turned towards the clinic's entrance, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as he did so, he knew that Aisha's legacy would live on forevermore, inspiring others to see beyond their own barriers and reach for help when they need it most. The Riverton Clinic was a testament to the power of determination, empathy, and compassion in making a difference in our world, and David felt honored to be part of such an incredible effort that had the potential to transform lives for generations to come. As the sun began to set over Riverton, the air was thick with a sense of anticipation. David had been selected by Aisha's foundation to lead their medical clinic in a remote town called Crossroads, where they aimed to provide health care and support services for underserved communities across America. The community consisted of families who often struggled to access basic necessities like food, housing, and health care due to limited resources or lack of infrastructure. The clinic was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields and trees that provided a serene backdrop for the patients and their visitors. David's team consisted of doctors, nurses, social workers, therapists, and volunteers who shared Aisha's vision of creating a more equitable and inclusive society where everyone had access to health care regardless of background or economic status. When David arrived at Crossroads, he was greeted by the warm welcome of his team members. They had been hard-working for months on site, building infrastructure such as new medical facilities, providing education about health and wellness, and establishing partnerships with local businesses to source essential supplies like food and cleaning products. Despite their efforts, the clinic faced significant challenges in terms of access and funding. One day, during a routine check-in session with one of Aisha's patients, David noticed that they were struggling with mental health issues due to poverty and stress caused by long hours at work and living in an unsafe neighborhood. He knew that addressing these underlying issues would require more than just providing basic medical care. It would also need to focus on supporting the patient's overall well-being and promoting resilience. David decided to schedule a follow-up appointment with Aisha herself, who was present throughout the session. During their conversation, David shared his observations about the challenges facing Crossroads community and how the clinic could play a role in addressing these issues. They discussed ways to establish a mental health support system within the clinic's care plans, such as offering counseling services for individuals struggling with anxiety or depression. Aisha was thrilled at David's proposal and supported their efforts to create a comprehensive approach that went beyond just providing medical care. She encouraged his team to partner with community organizations, schools, and social workers to identify areas where they could provide additional support and resources. As the weeks passed, Aisha continued to work closely with David and his team, overseeing the clinic's daily operations and ensuring that all patients received high-quality healthcare services. They faced numerous obstacles along the way, including limited funding, bureaucratic red tape, and resistance from some members of the community who were skeptical about their efforts. David recognized that change was not easy, but he remained committed to Aisha's vision of creating a better future for everyone in Crossroads. He knew that it would take time, effort, and patience, but he refused to give up on his dream. One day, David received an unexpected call from the Department of Health Services, informing him that their approval had been granted for funding to expand the clinic's services even further. This news was a huge relief for both Aisha and her team, as it meant they would be able to provide more comprehensive care to individuals in the community. Excited about their new opportunities, David and his team worked tirelessly over the next several months to upgrade the clinic's infrastructure and expand its programming. They added additional medical rooms with state-of-the-art equipment, hired a full-time nurse, and recruited volunteers who shared Aisha's passion for providing care to underserved communities. The clinic also expanded its reach by partnering with local businesses that provided essential supplies like food and cleaning products, which not only reduced the cost of healthcare services, but also helped build trust between patients and providers. The community became more engaged in their health journey, with many individuals attending regular check-ins and volunteering at the clinic to support its mission. As the clinic's reputation grew, so did its impact on the wider community. Patients began seeking out Aisha for help when they needed it most, whether that was mental health counseling or general medical care. The clinic became a trusted resource not just for people in need, but also for their neighbors and friends who were inspired by Aisha's vision. Despite facing numerous challenges along the way, David and his team never lost sight of their ultimate goal, to create a more equitable and inclusive society where everyone had access to healthcare regardless of background or economic status. They continued to work tirelessly towards this vision, always seeking out new ways to improve the lives of those in need and inspiring others to join them on their journey. In 2023, Aisha's foundation announced that they would be celebrating its 50th anniversary with a series of events throughout the country. David was invited to attend one of these celebrations as an honored guest, feeling humbled by his team's dedication to making a difference in people's lives. As he stood among the gathered community members and dignitaries, David reflected on how far they had come since their first clinic opening in 2013, when Aisha was just a young woman with a dream. He knew that their work would never be complete, but he also felt grateful for every step they took towards creating a brighter future for all. As the sun began to set over Crossroads once again, David stood at the entrance of the clinic's newly expanded space, feeling inspired by Aisha and her vision, as well as by the community that had come together to support them. He knew that their work was far from finished, but he felt confident in his team's ability to continue shaping the lives of countless individuals across America through healthcare and social justice initiatives like the Riverton Clinic. And with each passing day, David looked forward to the opportunity to make a lasting impact on this world, one patient at a time. For Aisha's legacy would live on forevermore, inspiring others to see beyond their own barriers and reach for help when they need it most. The Riverton Clinic was not just a place of care. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of community in making a difference. As the sun began to set over Crossroads, David stood at the entrance of the clinic's newly expanded space. The air was filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation as he prepared for the start of another day in his role as CEO of the Riverton Clinic. Inside the sprawling white building, rows upon rows of waiting patients sat on makeshift benches outside, while staff members busied themselves inside preparing to provide medical care. David watched as Aisha led a team of doctors, nurses, and social workers into the clinic's main facility, where they had been working tirelessly for months to expand their services and improve patient outcomes. Aisha was dressed in her signature green lab coat and white scrubs, radiating confidence and determination as she greeted each individual who entered the building. "Good evening," Aisha said, smiling warmly at David. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm just a little nervous," David replied, his heart racing with anticipation. "But I know that we have a lot to accomplish in these next few days." Aisha nodded and gestured for David to take a seat across from her. "Of course we do," she said. "We've been working tirelessly to make the Riverton Clinic even more accessible, providing better care to our community through medical services like vaccinations, mental health counseling, and primary care visits." David listened intently as Aisha described their plans for the clinic's expansion, her voice filled with pride at how far they had come. "We're thrilled that we were able to secure funding from a local philanthropist who supports healthcare initiatives in underserved communities," she said. As David continued to listen, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the support of his colleagues and patients like Aisha. They shared their stories with him about how the Riverton Clinic had helped them overcome challenges and live healthier lives, inspiring him to be even more committed to making a difference in people's lives every day. In that moment, David realized that he was part of something much bigger than himself. He wasn't just running a clinic. He was working towards creating a world where health care was accessible for all, regardless of income or background. As the sun began to set over Crossroads once again, David looked forward to another day in his role as CEO of the Riverton Clinic, determined to bring Aisha's vision and the hearts and minds of patients closer together. The next few days were a blur of activity at the clinic as David worked alongside Aisha and her team to execute their plans. They spent long hours preparing for patient appointments, conducting research on new medical treatments and procedures, and collaborating with local healthcare providers to ensure that the Riverton Clinic was seamlessly integrated into the larger health system. Despite the challenges they faced along the way, including funding shortages and resistance from some doctors who were skeptical about expanding their services in a community where access to care is already limited, David and his team persevered. They worked tirelessly to secure grants, build partnerships with local hospitals and clinics, and educate patients and healthcare providers alike on the importance of accessing quality medical care. As the weeks turned into months, progress was made at an alarming rate. The Riverton Clinic's services were expanded to include a range of advanced treatments for chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, as well as mental health counseling and primary care visits for all patients regardless of their background or income level. Patients began to come in waves, eager to receive the care they needed to live healthy lives. David watched with pride as his team worked tirelessly to improve patient outcomes, seeing firsthand how much each one had contributed to making a difference in people's lives. They completed groundbreaking research on new treatments for rare diseases and disorders that were previously overlooked by healthcare providers, and collaborated with local schools and community organizations to provide education and training programs to help patients and their families navigate the complexities of accessing medical care. The Riverton Clinic became not just a place where sick individuals received treatment, but also a beacon of hope and resilience in a community that had struggled for years to access quality medical care. Patients began to leave testimonials, sharing how Aisha's vision had transformed their lives and inspired them to reach out for help when they needed it most. As the sun began to set over Crossroads once again, David stood at the entrance of the clinic's newly expanded space, feeling a deep sense of pride in what he and his team had accomplished. They were proud of the impact that Aisha's vision had made on countless lives across America, from small towns like Riverton to major cities like New York City. "I couldn't have done it without you," David said with a smile, looking out at the bustling patients and staff members who gathered outside the clinic for their final checkup. "Each one of you has played a crucial role in making this clinic what it is today." Aisha stood next to him, her eyes sparkling with pride as she looked back on all that they had accomplished over the past few months. "We didn't know how much we could do until we put our minds and hearts into it," Aisha said. "But together, we have created a place where patients can access quality medical care, regardless of their circumstances." David nodded in agreement, feeling grateful for the support he had received from his colleagues and patients alike during this journey towards creating a brighter future for all. He knew that there were still challenges to be faced, but as they looked out over Crossroads once again, he felt confident in the knowledge that together they could make an even greater impact on the lives of those who needed it most. The Riverton Clinic was not just a place where sick individuals received treatment. It was a symbol of hope and resilience in a community that had struggled for years to access quality medical care. As the sun began to set over Crossroads once again, David stood at the entrance of their newly expanded space, feeling a deep sense of pride in what he and his team had accomplished. They were proud of the impact they had made on countless lives across America, from small towns like Riverton to major cities like New York City. "I couldn't have done it without you," David said with a smile, looking out at the bustling patients and staff members who gathered outside the clinic for their final checkup. "Each one of you has played a crucial role in making this clinic what it is today." Aisha stood next to him, her eyes sparkling with pride as she looked back on all that they had accomplished over the past few months. "We didn't know how much we could do until we put our minds and hearts into it," Aisha said. "But together, we have created a place where patients can access quality medical care, regardless of their circumstances." David nodded in agreement, feeling grateful for the support he had received from his colleagues and patients alike during this journey towards creating a brighter future for all. He knew that there were still challenges to be faced, but as they looked out over Crossroads once again, he felt confident in the knowledge that together they could make an even greater impact on the lives of those who needed it most. In the end, David had fulfilled his promise to Aisha and her vision by building a clinic that provided quality medical care to underserved communities across America. It was not just about treating sick individuals. It was about creating a world where healthcare was accessible for all, regardless of their background or income level. And as they stood at the entrance of their newly expanded space once again, David felt a deep sense of pride in what he had achieved and eager to continue working towards making a difference in people's lives every day. EXT, Crossroads. Day as the sun began to set over Riverton, the tension in the air was palpable. The small town of Crossroads had seen a significant transformation since David's arrival 4 years ago when he founded Aisha's clinic with his wife and colleagues. This once struggling community now provided affordable healthcare services for thousands of patients across its jurisdiction. David stood at the entrance to their newly expanded clinic, surrounded by rows of gleaming medical equipment and patient testimonials that highlighted the success they had achieved in improving access to quality care. The air was thick with anticipation as families eagerly awaited their next visit to the facility, which now offered a wide range of services including primary care medicine, mental health counseling, dental care, physical therapy, and more. The clinic's grand opening ceremony was attended by Aisha, David, his family, colleagues, and community leaders. The event began with an emotional speech from Dr. Rachel Thompson, the hospital's chief medical officer, who highlighted the importance of accessible health care for all communities and how Aisha's clinic had played a crucial role in achieving that goal. I am proud to stand here today as we celebrate the opening of our expanded clinic, she said, her voice filled with pride and gratitude. As you can see, Aisha's commitment to providing quality care has not only transformed this community, but also inspired us all to work together towards a brighter future for all. David nodded in agreement, feeling grateful for the support he had received from his colleagues and patients alike during this journey towards creating a brighter future for all. He knew that there were still challenges to be faced, but as they looked out over Crossroads once again, he felt confident in the knowledge that together they could make an even greater impact on the lives of those who needed it most. David had fulfilled his promise to Aisha and her vision by building a clinic that provided quality medical care to underserved communities across America. It was not just about treating sick individuals. It was about creating a world where health care was accessible for all, regardless of their background or income level. The clinic's mission statement reflected this commitment. At Aisha's clinic, we believe in the transformative power of access to quality health care. Our goal is to empower every individual and community to achieve optimal health by providing comprehensive care that meets their unique needs, whether they are struggling with illness, injury, mental health issues, or chronic conditions. As a result, David had invested heavily in training new medical staff, hiring experienced physicians who were passionate about improving patient outcomes while adhering to the highest standards of professionalism and ethics. He also worked closely with local healthcare providers to ensure that patients received access to specialized services whenever needed. The clinic's infrastructure was state-of-the-art, equipped with advanced diagnostic tools, modern surgical equipment, and a robust telemedicine platform for virtual consultations with specialists from around the country. The hospital had invested in partnerships with hospitals across the region, allowing it to share resources and expertise in areas where patients required specialized care but were unable or unwilling to travel. To support these efforts, Aisha's clinic also provided financial assistance programs that covered the cost of medications, diagnostic tests, and procedures for eligible patients. These initiatives not only reduced the burden on individuals' healthcare bills, but also ensured that they had access to essential services regardless of their income levels. One particular success story was a young woman named Sarah who struggled with anxiety disorders and depression. After years of living in poverty, she found herself unable to afford regular therapy sessions due to financial constraints. However, when Aisha's clinic reached out to her through the clinic's telemedicine platform, they were able to provide her with affordable treatment options that included cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and medication management. Thanks to their support, Sarah was able to overcome her mental health issues and regain control over her life. She shared her story with Aisha during a recent community meeting, highlighting the impact of accessible healthcare on improving her quality of life and inspiring others in need. Aisha's clinic also played an active role in advocating for policy changes that addressed access to healthcare disparities and worked with local stakeholders to pass laws that made it easier for patients from underserved communities to gain access to essential medical services. For example, they supported the implementation of Medicaid expansion programs in states across the country, which provided expanded coverage for low-income individuals. The clinic's success was not just limited to individual cases. It also inspired a ripple effect throughout the community. The healthcare workforce at Aisha's clinic had noticed an increase in patient satisfaction and retention rates since their opening, leading them to invest more resources into training new medical staff, providing better working conditions, and promoting wellness initiatives. The clinic's success story has not only transformed the lives of patients, but also influenced other organizations and stakeholders across the region. David and his team received numerous awards for their contributions to healthcare access in underserved communities, including recognition from the National Association of Medical Centers, NEMC, as one of the 10 most innovative healthcare facilities in 2023. As they stood at the entrance of their newly expanded space once again, David felt a deep sense of pride in what he had achieved and eager to continue working towards making a difference in people's lives every day. The clinic was not just about providing medical care. It was about creating an inclusive, accessible healthcare system that empowers all individuals, regardless of their background or circumstances. With Aisha's clinic now serving as the beating heart of Crossroads, David and his team were committed to continuing their mission of improving access to quality healthcare for all. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but with the unwavering dedication they had shown thus far, they believed in a future where every patient could benefit from the transformative power of accessible healthcare. The sun continued to set over Riverton, casting a warm golden glow on the bustling streets and the sprawling clinic that lay at its heart. David stood outside Aisha's clinic, gazing upon the familiar sight of his team hard at work, their faces etched with determination as they prepared for another day filled with patients seeking medical care. As he stepped inside to greet them, he was greeted by a flurry of activity and chatter from his colleagues. They all gathered around him, each one eager to share stories about their experiences working in the clinic and its impact on improving access to quality healthcare. David's eyes scanned over the crowded waiting room, taking note of the diverse array of patients who had come through its doors that night. He saw children with scraped knees from a nearby playground accident, seniors with chronic illnesses seeking regular checkups, and families grappling with financial struggles as they sought affordable medical care for their loved ones. But it wasn't just about providing basic healthcare services. Aisha's clinic was also committed to addressing the underlying issues that led to these disparities in access. David knew firsthand how systemic barriers such as poverty, discrimination, and lack of insurance coverage could prevent individuals from accessing quality health care, particularly those in underserved communities. As he began his shift at the clinic, he spent some time reviewing patient records and engaging with patients on their medical concerns. He spoke to a young woman who had been struggling with anxiety for years due to a family history of mental illness. Aisha's clinic provided her with access to evidence-based therapy programs that not only helped address her condition, but also taught her coping mechanisms and strategies for managing stress. Another patient, an elderly man named Tom, sat in the waiting room with his wife who had fallen ill just weeks before. Despite being well off, Tom had difficulty affording medications due to high drug costs. David's team worked closely with local health authorities to secure a sliding scale program that made healthcare more affordable for him and his family. Throughout the night, David encountered countless stories of triumphs and challenges in Aisha's clinic. Some patients were grateful for the care they received at the clinic, while others struggled with navigating insurance coverage or accessing specialized treatments. But despite these obstacles, he could see a sense of resilience among both patients and their families. As he finished his shift late into the night, David felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that his work was making a difference in people's lives. He reflected on the journey he had taken so far, from humble beginnings as a community health nurse to becoming a leader in healthcare access for underserved communities. His dedication and passion for improving healthcare outcomes motivated him to keep pushing forward, never losing sight of the vision of creating an inclusive, accessible healthcare system that empowers all individuals. The sun began to rise over Riverton once again, casting a warm glow on Aisha's clinic as David made his way back inside. He smiled at the staff members who had worked tirelessly throughout the night, each one looking accomplished and fulfilled in their roles. As he walked through the clinic's bustling halls, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to serve those in need of quality health care. The challenges that they faced were real, but with his team's unwavering commitment and dedication, Aisha's clinic had proven time and again that it was possible to make a difference in people's lives. As he stepped into the waiting room once more, David took note of the diverse array of patients who lay before him. Each one brought their own story, each with their unique needs and challenges. But for him, there was only one thing on his mind: making sure that Aisha's clinic continued to thrive as a beacon of hope in an increasingly complex world. And so, he stepped into the next day at Aisha's clinic, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. With the unwavering support and dedication of his team members and the vision of creating accessible healthcare for all individuals, David knew that together they could make a lasting impact on the lives of those seeking quality care in Riverton and beyond. As the sun began to set over Riverton, the air was thick with anticipation and nervousness. The clinic's bustling halls were filled with patients waiting for their appointments or consultations, each one eager to receive a diagnosis or treatment that would help them overcome their challenges. Aisha stood at her desk, surrounded by rows of charts and diagnostic tests on her computer screen. She had been working tirelessly for the past few weeks, trying to refine her approach to medicine and ensure that she was providing top-notch care to all those who came to her clinic. The patients were a diverse group with varying needs and backgrounds, but Aisha knew that their success would depend on the quality of care they received. As David entered the waiting room, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to serve those in need of quality health care. He had been working at Aisha's clinic since she first opened her doors 5 years ago and was proud of its reputation as a beacon of hope in an increasingly complex world. The challenges that they faced were real, from long wait times to limited resources, but with his team's unwavering commitment and dedication, Aisha's clinic had proven time and again that it was possible to make a difference in people's lives. As he stepped into the waiting room once more, David noticed that the patients were bustling about, some eagerly awaiting their appointments while others sat quietly, lost in thought or contemplation. The clinic staff members worked tirelessly behind the scenes, providing support and guidance as Aisha's and her team navigated each patient's unique needs with care. David looked around at his colleagues, each one an expert in their respective fields, and felt a sense of pride knowing that they were making a real difference in people's lives. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to keep up the high standards required to maintain Aisha's clinic's reputation as a top healthcare provider, especially with limited resources available. But David was determined to continue providing quality care, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As he entered the next room and greeted each patient, his heart swelled with gratitude for their trust in him and his team. He knew that they were counting on us to deliver compassionate, effective healthcare services that would help them overcome their health issues. For David, there was only one thing on his mind: making sure that Aisha's clinic continued to thrive as a beacon of hope in an increasingly complex world. And so, he stepped into the next day at Aisha's clinic, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. As he began to work with each patient, David encountered challenges and obstacles that tested his resolve, but also inspired him to keep pushing forward. Some patients were struggling with anxiety or depression, while others had been through traumatic experiences that required specialized care. But no matter what their background was, Aisha's clinic was always willing to provide the support they needed. David worked tirelessly alongside his team members, each one an expert in their respective fields and dedicated to providing top-notch care for every patient. They shared an unwavering commitment to delivering compassionate and effective healthcare services that would help them overcome their health issues. As he continued to work with patients, David noticed the positive impact that Aisha's clinic was having on the lives of those seeking quality care in Riverton and beyond. Patients were coming out of treatment earlier than expected, feeling better overall, and more confident about their futures. They also reported improved mental health symptoms, reduced stress levels, and a greater sense of hope. David felt grateful for his role in helping Aisha's clinic continue to thrive as a beacon of hope in an increasingly complex world. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to keep up the high standards required to maintain this reputation, especially with limited resources available. But he was determined to stay true to Aisha's vision and dedication, using their expertise and unwavering commitment to provide exceptional healthcare services that would help people achieve better health outcomes. For David, there was only one thing on his mind: making sure that Aisha's clinic continued to thrive as a beacon of hope in an increasingly complex world. And so, he stepped into the next day at Aisha's clinic, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. As he began to work with each patient, he encountered challenges and obstacles that tested his resolve, but also inspired him to keep pushing forward. Some patients were struggling with anxiety or depression, while others had been through traumatic experiences that required specialized care. But no matter what their background was, Aisha's clinic was always willing to provide the support they needed. David worked tirelessly alongside his team members, each one an expert in their respective fields and dedicated to providing top-notch care for every patient. They shared an unwavering commitment to delivering compassionate and effective healthcare services that would help them overcome health issues.